All right.
We're rolling.
Yes,
Okay.
we're rolling. Grab yourself a cozy drink, maybe even a glass of wine, and join us here at the soon to be named book club. I am, of course, your hostess with the mostest, Ian. As always, we have our book club mom. Okay. We have Decal,
No.
and we have Heart Illustrations, but you can call her Soap.
Hi, everyone.
All right. Let me just check.
Are we good?
No, I don't think so.
Yes.
I don't think so. Oh, no, I can hear you. So we're good. Oh, crap. So what have we
Oh,
been
okay.
I missed
So we're
that.
good.
We're good now. We did the thing. Fantastic.
Yay!
Okay. Oh boy. All right.
Better to limp us forward than to not move forward at all.
Exactly. Oh man. So last week we got a lovely introduction to most of our main characters. We met Caroline and Nella in the Lost Apothecary. We got a little intro to Eliza, and we didn't know if we were going to see her again. But if you read this week, we definitely see she's one of the three main characters we got going on. With Nella, I mean, we learned a little bit of backstory about Caroline and Nella. Nella is the lovely person running the apothecary that we found out that she kills men. And she
Love
actually
it.
killed her own lover, which we still are figuring out why. They are in the 1800s. I forgot exactly what decade.
1791.
Of 1790.
Late 1800s.
So
Or late 18th century.
late 18th
That's
century. That's right.
sorry.
Um, and Caroline is present day. Caroline is going through her own stuff. She's on a vacation in London for supposed to be her, what, 10-year anniversary was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
But she, right before the trip, found that her husband was unfaithful, and now she's doing her own thing. So yes, we're all
We don't like
James.
names.
We're all James haters here.
2 thumbs down.
And just with a little bit of foreshadowing, I think we're going to end up being Frederick haters too. But
We're 1 thumbs down for him right now. The more we learn, maybe 2.
fair enough. Oh man. So for this section, in a sentence or less, what did we think about it?
I'd say about discovery.
Mm.
Suspenseful, maybe?
What'd you say, Deco?
Did you say one sentence or less or one word?
I said one sentence or I might have said one word, but I meant one sentence or less.
Okay. I usually have something to say, but
You're just speechless.
just speechless. Yeah. No. I don't even know. Shares.
I would say, yeah, I would say mystery. We'll give it that. But also just like finding the love of history again. Like
I feel like we're
just
following a trail of breadcrumbs.
right, like just jumping right into it. Like I am so like as a history buff myself, I am completely into this whole process. Like the maps and the research and the like little baby suspense and mystery stuff. Oh, I am all about it. I was like, if I can go to London and have this experience, sign me up just from mudlarking. Like, but now I'm gonna have this like expectation, and it's gonna be a problem. I can tell.
Yeah.
I'm in the
But
same boat. I love it. I love the history. I actually saw a New York Times article this week that was about a lot of the rivers in Europe. Like right now, currently, they're going through a lot of droughts in Europe, and one of the rivers like unearthed an entire fleet of German Navy ships that they sunk so that their enemies, the Allied powers in World War II wouldn't have access to them. And then there's like a bunch of other stuff that's being uncovered because they're going through this drought. And I was reading it and I was so interested in it. And it reminded me of this book. And then the environmentalist in me was sad because I was like, no, global warming.
very true. Did you see, but just to go back to like the United States, did you see in that dinosaur valley though, they found dinosaur prints that are like millions of years old?
I did. And I am so excited.
Matches your background very well. Yeah.
I was gonna
just about to say.
I can't wait to hear more about it.
What does this? Okay, yeah. So what did we? So we got Eliza's point of view for the first time in this chapter. What did we? How did we feel about that? So how do we feel about that in general, and then how do we feel about getting three persons' point of view, like running the story? Like, do we like that style? Is it a little like weird for us to read, and we have to get used to it? What do we all?
I like it. I think it's interesting to see the different points of view from these three women at three different stages in their life, and of course, in at least two different time periods. So I find it to be fascinating, and I think the author is doing a good job of telling everybody's story, and it's easy to keep track of, who's doing what, and so I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I agree. I like it. Sorry.
That's okay.
I like it a lot, especially the parts where we have like Nella and Eliza and they like flip flop and like pick up right after each other, and then it's their two different perspectives. Yeah, I really like it. And I like how it's kind of like three different women, and obviously we're in two different time periods, but I like how it's three different women in different stages of their lives. Like Nella's obviously a little bit older and her health is declining, and like I don't know if we figured everything out with it, but like she obviously really wanted a child and almost had a child, but then everything kind of came crashing down. And so I feel like it's really beautiful the way she writes their three different stories, because we have that with Nella, and then we have Eliza, who's 12 years old, who's just like coming of age and maturing and hitting puberty and starting her period. And then we have Caroline, who's in present day and who's struggling with her own things, where she's wanted a child with her husband for so long, and then he cheated on her, and now she thinks she might be pregnant, but she doesn't know for sure. So I feel like even just those three aspects of all of their stories is really interesting, and the way they're like woven together, I think it's just really cool.
Yeah, the different point of views really, I think, really help the story along. Um, you get just like the inner monologues, which is always nice, especially when you're trying to learn characters. So it's definitely a different writing style, but I certainly appreciate it, and just how it moves along with everything, and like you get just those inner thoughts, and you get to know, instead of just knowing kind of like one character or maybe two like usual, you get to know like the main group. So I think that's very fun.
I think that's a really cool perspective as well as even like how they're at the library and how it's so different from present day from what it used to look like however many years ago, right, in the 1700s, and how that whole area around Bear Alley is now built up to like their version of Wall Street. And that door is still there though. So it's still like, how after this allotted amount of time, right? So
200 years or something. Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I love that whole aspect of just like hidden doors and everything just chilling there. I mean, we could open it and it just be, you know, a cellar to one of these companies that have built on top of it. So we really don't know. It could be just a giant dead end for her.
I doubt it. Unless it's a dead end that leads her
Somewhere else.
to, yeah, like unless it's a dead end that like propels her forward in finding out about the apothecary, I doubt it's a dead end.
Okay. I like that prediction.
It's a dead end, I'll be sad.
So we start off this section with Eliza's point of view, of course. And so this is the first time we get her little inner monologue and really meet her. Like, of course, we get little like Nella's vibe from her, but you know, we don't really get to know someone off of that. But we through her story though, we go through like the whole murder in the first like two sections we read about her. So how like how do we feel about Eliza as a character? Are we liking her? What how do like yeah, we'll start there.
Yeah, I like her. I think I like her the most so far. I think
Okay.
she brings a whole new perspective to the book, especially like being on the other side of Nella, right? It's just like, here's somebody who's been killing all their life, and then now we bring in somebody who's actually doing the hard work to get there. And it's like completely 180 of kind of how I expected her to be, because it's like, how are you 12 years old and like very willing to do this? And then you kind of find out her backstory, and you're like, well, maybe I like that is a good reason, right? So, especially if he's done it to possibly another somebody in their house, right? So, I think with that being said, it makes a lot of sense in like giving her backstory, because like I think we were all curious of like why is this 12-year-old there, and like why is she willing to do this, and is she going to do this, right?
Hmm.
So I do like their perspective and how they brought it all in.
Yeah, I appreciate Eliza as a character. I'm not sure if she's my favorite. I'm all about Nella and her mystery and everything, but she definitely adds to the story, and I think it's a good balance between, you know, Nella and Eliza. It's a very, very fun balance eventually, and I think we're just going to see that relationship kind of bloom, which will be interesting, to say the
Yeah,
least.
because I mean, I know it's not like in the first chapter that we read with Eliza, but eventually we get to the point where Eliza goes back to the apothecary shop and she like she wants to work for Nella. She wants to help Nella while her mistress is gone, because obviously in that first chapter we read with her, she follows through on it. She gives Mr. Amwell the eggs, he dies, everything's all done. But I think, and then later in the chapters that we read, like Nella tries to tell Eliza, like, you can't be here. Like, this is not a place for you. And it's mostly Nella just not wanting to continue on, like teaching a child how to poison people. But I think that Nella's gonna kind of see like, oh, Eliza can help me. Like, she could rewrite the labels, because she asks her right before the lady shows up. She's like, I can't put her poison in this vial. Can you do it? So I think sort of out of necessity, we're gonna see Eliza more, because I think Nella's gonna realize that she needs Eliza more. So yeah, to answer your question, I do like Eliza. I think she brings kind of like a youthfulness to the story and like a curiosity So it's like all of the questions that Eliza is having for Nella are things that I'm thinking and things that I want answered. So I think she provides a good perspective.
And it's another support character. So Caroline has Gaynor in a sense, right? Caroline has Gaynor to help her sort of navigate London and the whole research on what's happening with the, Bear Alley. And Nella now has Eliza, who hopefully seems like will become like her apprentice, or I guess that's the best word for it.
So how did we feel about the murder as a whole? Like, did we think it was gonna go slower? Did we think it was gonna go quicker? The way Nella made it seem like in the last section seemed like it was gonna go a lot quicker. Like it went on like a good time, but it definitely seemed like, and even like the way he was acting, definitely at the table, I was like, oh, he's just gonna plop. That's gonna be that. Like Eliza's gonna accidentally see, what Nella warned her not to.
So did she eventually see him, the whole spine thing, or no?
I don't think so. Because she
Yeah, I thought
remember she walked out of the room where he was before he died, and then she was down in like the drawing room or something with Mrs. Amwell, and that servant came down and was like, he's not breathing anymore. So I don't think either of them were there when he actually
Actually
died.
died, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but there was
Yeah,
that
I think
interaction with them. Sorry, there was an interaction with them though. Like as he was like slowly drifting into death in bed. Because there was that whole like staring scene and like she was like his eyes were
Yeah, that was
focused
weird.
and everything. And um go ahead, Mom. Book club, Mom.
I think it goes back to, again, in those times, everything was mysterious. And of course, death is mysterious, right? We don't know what happens to those who have died, right? We imagine all these things, and right, this is a child imagining what's happening to this person and thinking, oh no, this ghost is going to haunt me now, and all these terrible things that start to happen to me, right? I'm hearing these things and I'm experiencing these things, and honestly, I think it tells you this is Eliza, and she's a youthful person because somebody like Nella is like, I don't believe in ghosts, and don't worry about that. And so it's you can see already that Nella is going to help Eliza understand things and experience what it is to be an apothecarist, and of course, either to help people or to hurt people. So.
Very true. What did we so Eliza's getting into a lot of this like I wouldn't know if I would really call it superstitious stuff, but like, she's got her whole thing with Joanna, who I guess we can start with her. Do we think that story is real or that she's real? Or do we think it was some tall tale from I think her name was Sally?
Allie.
Sally.
No, I imagine that probably happened all the time in these wealthy homes. The man of the house was probably always taking advantage of the younger young ladies in the house, especially the help, who had no recourse. Right? These are young women, uneducated. Nobody believed in any kind of rights at that point. You were pretty much their servant, and even if you spoke up, you were out on the street. So unfortunately, these young ladies unfortunately, they had to experience it, even something they probably didn't know anything about, right? And then try to deal with the aftermath, if that meant pregnancy or whatever, right? More advances by this person. And so I think it was a very tough situation for these young, I mean, anybody who was in a household like that, right? I'm sure they were always taken advantage of because they were thought to be second-class citizens. I guess that's the best way to look at it.
Yeah, I think it definitely could have happened. Especially, I mean, I believe in ghosts, so like if Eliza was hearing Joanna, or like if whatever she thought was Joanna, like I think that it could have happened too. And like you said, book club mom, I think it probably happened a lot with servants and masters, and just like an abuse of power and men taking advantage of younger women, because we do get that in, I think, the first or second chapter or something, where Mrs. Amwell she talks to Eliza, but Eliza also notices, like, the more that she's maturing, the more Mr. Amwell is taking notice of her. And then we have that whole instance that happens where she doesn't feel good, and then he just sort of intrudes and is in her room, and thankfully something happens and stops it from going further. So I definitely think that it happened or could have happened. The only reason that I would say that I'm a little skeptical of the story is because Sally was the one who told it to Eliza. And it sounds like all the other servants in the house don't really like Eliza because Mrs. Amwell took a liking to her. So I'm wondering if Sally told Eliza that to kind of scare Eliza a little bit. Or maybe she just embellished the story a little bit, like with Joanna's ghost, to kind of freak Eliza out. So, like, maybe whatever with Joanna actually did happen, but what Sally told Eliza was just like an embellishment of the story to freak Eliza out.
Yeah,
But
that
I
could
don't
be
know if
true.
that's
Yeah. Yeah, I assume the story has some truth to it, but I'm not sure what exactly she's hearing, unless we are gonna go like the ghost magic route type thing. But I'm not, I don't know, I don't feel like the book's gonna take that turn that way. Like there's been this big stress with Nella of like you take from the earth, it's real. Like this is what I'm offering you. Like that otherworldly ghost stuff, no. If you want fixes for that, you gotta go somewhere else.
Well, and that's what happens. You know, that's what we read
yeah.
later in the story. Nella tells, not because she explains that she's worried about the ghosts, and Nella says, you know, she looks for this pamphlet that her mom gave her years ago that had to do with magic. And so I thought it was interesting that, of course, Nella knows of these things, and there's probably bookstores and bookshops of curiosities in London where you could find, you know, discussions of all sorts of things having to do with superstitions and the occult and magic and spells and all that kind of stuff. So,
Oh, I bet. I mean, you can find that probably anywhere though. Like there's lore everywhere. So that's always fun though to explore those types of cities that really dive into it. Which, of course, I think, yeah, no, I actually just saw um, an article saying that one of the hospitals in London, or at least like UK proper, is like 900 years old, and the amount of like plagues that they've seen and dealt with from like the Spanish flu to COVID, and I was like, whoa. I was like, I didn't even think about that. Like I know like you always imagine like the buildings
Yeah.
over there being as old as they are, like the churches and everything else that's been preserved, but I didn't even I didn't even think about like hospitals over there that could be still standing and working.
hmm Well, and it's like, I mean, in the United States, we're not really that old of a country as far
No.
as colonization goes. Like, so, I mean, everything that's like in the UK and a lot of other countries is old and has been around for centuries and centuries. And of course, the United States had a history, much like a really rich history, much like prior to colonization, but like, you know, cities like Detroit and stuff are like 300 years old by like modern standards, I guess. And so it's just like we don't really have anything that is that old and that treasured in the United States, because like the things that were that old, you know, obviously have been destroyed, or, you know, a lot of stuff like that. And so it's like, yeah, like when you're in a foreign country and you see that and it's like there's so much rich history there, it's like it's kind of hard to believe it when you're, you know, you're born in the US kind of thing.
In college, I had to read a book. It was called God's Hotel, where they, this lady in present time, she actually would take work from Hildegard, who's like a saint from like 1100, and through her practices, because she was very like, you have to like visualize the body and all these like, all of the medical writings she did, she was able to help these people who are basically, they were like people off the street who couldn't pay for real hospitals. They just kind of went there to basically die. And she saved hundreds of them based off of the techniques from like 1100, literally. So it's very cool to see people still try to use it.
Yeah. I mean, there's got to be stories all over the place about that. Like there was, you know, there was like, yeah, culture itself was like at an upward angle, and even with medical and stuff like that, and then it kind of dipped, and now we're like, if there wasn't the dip, I can't even imagine where we'd be right now. I always not love thinking about that, but it's just mind-boggling, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Yeah,
if
I
we
think it's
just
cool to think about the stuff that lasts and like transcends time, kind of. Yeah. So I feel like that's why this book is intriguing, because I mean, there's still natural remedies out there for all kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, I think that's why this is part of the reason why this is an intriguing read.
Yes. So what? So bringing it back to the book. um, so how do we feel about Eliza, like feeling that Mr. Amwell's ghost is now haunting her?
I think I would also feel the same way, especially if he like looked into your eyes before he died with like basically just like black eyes, and that would probably put the fear of death in me for sure. So
Or
I
his
don't know.
ghost
I wouldn't. Yeah, you're already like subconsciously like, yeah, he's come back to get me, right? So
Yeah.
But remember, it's her 12-year-old mind, right? She's conjuring up all these horrible ideas, and really the reality is not that, right? She can,
Yeah.
like, again, she's young and impressionable, and of course she's heard all of these stories, and you know, so again, she just has to grow up and work through it, right? So.
And I think that's one of those moments where we see that Eliza is so much younger than Caroline and Nella, and even Mrs. Amwell too, because she is already kind of paranoid about ghosts. And then, like, Mr. Amwell dies, and then as soon as Mr. Amwell dies, I mean, she's 12 years old and she's maturing and she starts her period like the same hour that Mr. Amwell dies. And those things are like completely unrelated, but weren't really talked about back then. So she doesn't understand what's going on. She thinks she's dying, and I kind of loved the way that they wrote it, because even when she was like crying and sobbing to Mrs. Amwell, like, she was scared because she was bleeding, and Mrs. Amwell was like, no, this is natural, like this is normal. But that was even like too vague. Like it was too vague for Eliza to understand that, like, no, this is just the natural process of your body as a woman. And so I think that, combined with her being a child, she's like she's grasping at straws and like looking for any explanation as to why she's bleeding. And she's like, yeah, I'm being haunted. That's it. That's the thing.
But that was really a thing. Nobody talked about your period back, especially in the 1790s, right? Everyone, it was too delicate a subject. Most women weren't free to talk about those things. And even up to the early 19, let's see, because I can tell you my grandmother, she had no mother. Her mother died in childbirth, and she unfortunately thought she was dying when her period started, and no one was there to tell her any different. And so I remember her talking to me about that when I was young. So she was trying to prepare me with a foreknowledge that this is going to happen, and it's a natural progression of you growing up, right? And so I can't even imagine looking back, on my poor grandmother at, 11 or 12, starting her period and thinking, oh my God, I'm bleeding, I'm going to die, right? How do I stop this? How do I, how, just not even knowing that this is a natural progression of you growing up. It just was, to me, so sad. But so now, young ladies of your age their mothers are telling, your mother's probably told you before you started your period, or you had classes in school. This is a much more open society where we're talking about all kinds of things, probably sometimes too many things before you were even ready for them. So, but again, here we go. We're trying to prepare everyone for things, and hopefully help prepare you for just growing up.
Yeah, and it sounds like your grandmother was trying to save you, like the fright and like the scare that she experienced was like, if I had to go through that, like my granddaughter is not going to.
And just, all the feminine products, sorry, but holy cow, imagine having to use rags. That's what they use to catch their blood, and having to wash it all out. And, now we're just so disposable, throw it out and not worry about it. It's just a whole different world, boy.
I always kind of think about that too. Like when you see period dramas, like not like period menstrual cycle, but like period, like
Right.
when you see like dramas, like old, whatever you want to call them, they never ever address it. They never talk about it. It's like we get this whole story of these girls and these women, if there's women involved in these stories or these retellings or whatever it is, and it's like, this is like the 1800s. I want to know how they dealt with it. And then they just kind of like movies and stuff, they'll just like not say anything about it. And I'm like, I know it was happening. How'd you deal with it?
Well, just going to the restroom had to be a process, with all the clothes and everything they had on. Oh my gosh, it just had to be
Corsets and like layers and stuff. Like, I can't even imagine wearing that and being on my period. No.
No air conditioning. Just
what they were always indisposed, right? For that week, they didn't go out, they didn't do anything. They were just staying at home.
Yeah, if you try to put a corset on me while I'm having cramps, I'd probably pull a knife on you.
Yep. Well, even like I know so many of them were like malnourished, or like they weren't getting a lot like the proper nutrients and stuff. So I wonder like how much that also really affected these poor women, or like did it go obsolete for some of them? Like especially like I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't even think about either. That's probably true. I feel like they probably all had really irregular cycles. Because they just, especially those who were like poor and like in the servant class or whatever, because you got to imagine, like, if you can't eat, like you can't nourish your body, and you need that to grow.
yeah.
Are you enjoying this, Ian?
Yeah. I can imagine I can just imagine it being super scary. But like the whole situation, like I loved I loved what Mrs. Amwell said, but I was like that doesn't say anything to her. I'm like, if I'm going through something and I get that, I'm gonna be like, what? I'm like, the amount of like, you could have just been blunt and like we could have avoided this whole thing. It's just kind of like, Mrs. Amwell, come on
Well,
now.
it also tells you that's probably why Eliza was again drawn to Nella, because Nella's going to give her the straight scoop, right? She's going to tell her like it is. And she could already see that Mrs. Amwell, no matter how nice she is and how she kind of saved Eliza from, going back to the farm, she was kind of useless, so,
Yeah.
and she left Nella she left, excuse me, Eliza to her own devices instead of taking her with her. I thought that was kind of weird
Me
that
too.
we wouldn't have developed this relationship with Nella and Eliza if she left, of course.
Mhm.
But it just was kind of strange that, especially with all that was happening with Eliza, the fact that she just poisoned Mr. Amwell, the fact that her period just started, the fact that she's afraid of ghosts, all those things. And here goes Mrs. Amwell off to the country to grieve for her husband, right? Or
Grieve.
grieve. Right.
Celebrate.
Yeah, celebrate. Right. So,
Ooh.
yeah, right.
Like you think that Miss Amwell would have said a little bit more to Eliza rather than just up and leave, because Eliza still has all of those same questions and paranoia when she gets to the apothecary shop, and she just wants to understand.
Right. So you
Yeah.
can see why Eliza is drawn to Nella, because she believes she's going to be honest with her and tell her what's going on. I don't understand this. Explain it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised. What was it? I mean, I guess I'm not really surprised, but I was actually kind of surprised that Eliza didn't like bluntly ask Nella. Like she's kind of scared, and like she was leading up to that whole conversation with her, and I was just kind of sitting there like, oh, just ask her, she'll tell you.
well, again, she's 12, right?
I know.
She doesn't know if Nella will accept her, but she's smart enough and brave enough to realize Nella needs my help, right? She's having trouble with her own hands and her own stability, and now she's going to make herself useful.
Mm-hmm.
So does Nella and like Mrs. Amsworth or whatever, do they have the same issue going on with like not being able to write and the joint thing, or
Well, you want
I don't,
some kind of arthritis or something else. I don't know.
I mean,
that's what I thought, but it sounds way worse than that.
I think Nella's is probably
Oh.
something different. Just because, do you
She's
remember?
from some kind of poison. I mean, she's experienced all these poisons, these natural poisons, right? She's trying to protect herself, but you can't. In those days, how can you protect yourself, right? You don't have PPE, right, that you're getting in and out of as you're doing your experiments, right? No, you're going out into the woods, you're going out to the fields to hunt up all this stuff, and you're getting exposed to it. So I'm
Yeah,
sure,
like those. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, just like painters, right, who are always eating or licking their brushes, right? They're always getting poison from the lead. So,
Radium too. Yeah.
oh, yeah.
When we used radium on watch dials.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, you got to imagine, like, if those beetles that she was digging up, if them like roasted and crushed up is poisonous, it's like just harvesting them has to be
Yeah.
poisoning her too. And then also when she's on her way to harvest the beetles, she's like hacking up a lung, and she says that there's this like bright green mucus, which is like, I don't know if that's like a symptom of bronchitis or like maybe a lung infection or something, but I mean, she's in that, or even mold poisoning, I guess, because she's in that tiny little shot behind that wall with all of these poisons. So I feel like that's definitely affecting her lungs too.
Yeah. With that though, we did get a little glimpse into like how she lives. And it didn't bluntly say that like that's her home, but she's kind of like, I have to be here almost 24/7 sometimes. Like, so I'm assuming, I mean, I would like to think that she still has like another home, but maybe not. Maybe she's just stuck in that little room.
She needs another home, the poor woman.
But
My
yeah,
God.
that's for sure. She needs another home.
Just
Probably got a vitamin D deficiency.
and just the mental weight of being in that apothecary 24/7. Oh my gosh, that's got to be depressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. So I guess before we get to the end of Nella and Eliza and our new character that we sadly met, um, we can jump a little bit into Caroline's lovely little I don't want to say story. Well, I guess lovely little storyline we get in this section. So we start off with like potential morning sickness, but she's just hoping it's jet lag. Um, but yeah, so I did like that little bit that she was like she just woke up in the middle of the night because of jet lag, and then she's like, I'm gonna do some research, and so she just kind of just stays up and does it in the middle of London, and I'm like, appropriate. I'm like, with everything you've got going on, might as well. Like, why not? Um, but I do love just throughout her whole storyline, even Gaynor's like, yeah, Google's not a researcher's friend sometimes, which is very true. Sometimes if you know how to search it, of course, like it pops up what you need. But yeah, no, those resources that schools or libraries or whatever offer golden. The amount
Way
of
better.
like the amount of what would you like archives or things that I were able to use was just so
Mhm.
helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those are definitely like the most fun things that I worked on in my own academic career. So I did a whole thing about maps too. Like they made you pick an area and like go back in maps and see it. So like I'm loving this whole thing. I'm like, oh, like if I actually want to be an educator, I definitely would make my students do that for sure. I love that concept. I'm like, to get to know your area better, learn about what they bulldozed, what they created. Like it's just so much fun for me as a nerd.
Yeah. Same. And I love maps. Like even to this day in 2022, I keep a road atlas in my car. Like I try to get a new road atlas like every couple years, and I use it because I've done multiple cross country trips with my dad, and we use the maps on the iPhone and stuff. But like I always have a road map wherever I go, like a physical copy, and I just love it. It's so cool. Like cartography is so interesting. So I definitely loved when Caroline went to the library and was going through those maps with Gaynor, and they were like overlaying, and they were all digitized too, which I was like, that cool.
Yes.
They were overlaying them all over each other, and it was just cool to see like what used to be there, and then like what was left of that, and then like what's there now. And like even when I was living in Tacoma, I was following, or I'm still following this account on Instagram, and it's called Over Tacoma, and it's just it compares all like old pictures of what Tacoma used to look like, and then like then versus now. And even though that's not technically maps, it's still cool to kind of see what used to be there, and then even if there is like some buildings left, they're like altered in some way to kind of like be more modern or fit better. So like I think that's really cool just to see how the architecture and just like the city planning and everything changes. So yeah, that was really awesome.
It's also very funny that like sometimes older maps are way more detailed than newer ones. and it literally just depends on how much the person cares. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh man, I'm like that is so weird to me, but like it makes sense, of course. Oh, uh,
We're talking about Roke's map that was from
yeah,
1746 and how detailed and accurate it was. So it's amazing that they were lucky enough to have those maps and they preserve them. So it's really
Hmm.
oh for sure. And then oh, and then in that first chapter that we read about Caroline, she receives some like ominous note and then figures out and then sees the email, of course, that says James is coming to England. I'm like, ooh, I'm like this is interesting. I'm like, James, you probably should have just given her that that breathing time. But
Like,
okay.
we already know I'm not a fan of James. I'm super not a fan of James now. Because to me, he's just reading as this middle-aged, egotistical, narcissistic jerk who's like, I miss you, the other half of my heart. I can't be away from you. Let me book a plane ticket without asking you first, even though you told me you wanted to go on this vacation by yourself for space. So I thought for sure when that happened and that popped up and she got that call and that message, I was like, oh no, swear to God, if in this section we meet James, I'm gonna be angry because everything's gonna fall apart. Because I mean, maybe not, but you never know. And so obviously James has not made it to London yet, and I am really hoping that when he does, she just kind of tells him like, no thanks, dude, bye-bye. I'm interested in this historical thing. Like, I'm trying to figure this out. I don't want to leave London. I don't want to see you. You should have never came here. Leave. Like, I'm so mad at James. Ugh.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised we haven't met him yet, but we're definitely gonna get a taste of James in the next section. So
Mhm.
I'll be
And
ready
I'm
for
sure
the
whatever
rants.
taste it's going to be, it's not going to redeem.
What did you say? Sorry, I didn't hear you well.
I said, I'm sure whatever taste of James we will get, it will not redeem him.
That's hilarious. And then what? Sorry, I needed to flip the page. Oh yeah, and then so right before, so we kind of get like we don't really have that much progression in these stories either. Like we get a couple days out of our old-timey characters. I think we get like 3 or 4 days. But Caroline again is in the span of like 8 hours, I think. So, but yeah, so we also get, so we did touch on how Caroline went to that bare alley that she found on that old map. She saw that secret door, but sadly did not go adventure to it. I was like, oh, just do it. Just tell me what
Yeah.
you see. What do we, well, one, do we think she's gonna go back and explore it?
Of course, her curiosity is too great.
Okay. And then what do we think is behind the door if we get a glimpse into it? Do we think we're going to get this spitting image of the apothecary that we get with Nella and Eliza, or are we gonna just find some cellar?
I think it all depends on how the next chapters go, especially if the lady who wanted to kill her husband, the last lady, was basically like, if you don't give me this, like, I'm definitely calling the authorities on you. So I think it all depends on how that goes based off of what we're going to find.
Oh, with
Well,
Nella?
that's
Yeah.
she doesn't want to kill her husband. She wants to kill the mistress. And that's what Nella takes exception with. She said, I'm not killing a woman, and then all hell breaks loose.
Well, and even she was like, I'm not knowingly killing a woman, because she even mentioned like,
yes, she doesn't.
Maybe,
right.
Yeah, she doesn't know what everyone does with all of her poisons and potions and stuff, but like she's not gonna outwardly kill a woman, which I mean, props to her for standing up for herself and telling this woman no. But makes me a little nervous.
Well, I mean, where do where do we think we're going with that though? That huge ending with basically Lady Clarence just throwing in this whole blackmail aspect with Nella. I mean, of course, the scene itself was like tense because Nella threw threw all of her hard work into the fire because she also realized that because if Lady Clarence picked up that bottle, she probably was going to get the dust or concoction on her. I was like, Lady Clarence, please pay attention. What is going on?
Together.
But that was some very heavy foreshadowing in that section or that chapter too. Because not only was it like, oh, the note doesn't sit well with me, but it kept going over with this like, I don't deal with very rich women, and they're always trouble. They're always like, there's so many more unknowns, and I'm like, oh no.
And then we were introduced to Lady Clarence, and she was troubled.
And she certainly is trouble. That's an understatement. So, do we think Nella's gonna like go back out and make it? Do we think she's gonna end up leaving? Where are we going with Nella and even Eliza if Nella disappears?
Right now, I'm thinking Eliza's house, that where her mistress is completely empty right now, and they're gonna live there for a few weeks.
That's not a bad prediction.
So you
I mean,
don't think Nella's gonna go through with making a new concoction?
No. Because they have 24 hours to move everything, and it sounds like it's a small room, so.
they might concentrate on doing that. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Because I was.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was kind of thinking that Nella would send out Eliza so that she doesn't get discovered. But well, and then Lady Clarence also was like, don't try any tricks on me. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but part of me thinks that this whole Lady Clarence situation is going to start the breadcrumb trail of like the murders or them finding out about the murders. Like, even if Nella doesn't help Lady Clarence, like say she doesn't, say they spend this next 24 hours like sprucing up the apothecary shop to just look like a normal apothecary, and they like evade the authorities. I think Lady Clarence starting the authorities, like alerting the authorities, is going to start the breadcrumb trail of them doing the murders. And then I feel like that's going to leave the paper trail for Caroline to discover the apothecary murders. And so I think this is kind of how the two stories start to intertwine. But yeah, I really don't know. I think it could go either way, that they'll either help her or they won't. But either way, I think it's going to tie it into Caroline's story and leave the paper trail for Caroline to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Nella's got to weigh her options here. Like, she definitely still wants to stay and help women. So I don't know. She might end up rolling the dice and creating something for this woman, for Lady Clarence. But I don't know. I don't. I feel like if she doesn't, this would be the end of Nella's story, and I don't know if we're gonna get that. But we'll see in the next section for sure. And then we end off with Caroline's story. Um, so that's where she goes to see like Gaynor and the maps, and we have that little lovely interaction. The one line that I really liked from that whole thing though was where she compares like her trip and herself with the door, of course, and like kind of nervous what she's gonna find when she opens it, and like it's the whole looking inside wasn't always comfortable, and I really like that. But we do have we are like T minus 1 hour from potentially meeting James. So what do we think is gonna happen with that? Where are we going with Caroline?
I think she's immersed herself so much in this history thing that if it goes well, she's not going to go back with James. And I think James is just going to be like, I don't know, most people that cheat, where it's just going to come right back and try to swoop in, right? But I think she's going to be like, no, goodbye.
But is James going to leave?
He better.
He has a job, so
He has no choice. And a mistress he can go home to. You don't need Caroline anymore.
That is true. Oh.
I hope whatever sob story he sells her, she just in one ear, out the other. Doesn't even care. He didn't give her the space she asked for. It's rude.
Yeah. I definitely think it's gonna be a whole. I don't know. I think it go either way with Caroline though. Like she's definitely the type that like she's only had like 24 hours to kind of deal with this all by herself. So there definitely could be an easy thing, like a thing where like she sees him and it's like, ugh, like I miss this. Like I think by now she has a little bit more like self-confidence in herself with it all. So I don't think it's gonna be like, oh, James, I love you. Like I don't think that's gonna happen. That would be weird, I think, at this point if it did.
Gross.
But yeah, I don't know. James definitely seems like the lingering type. So I would hope that Eliza, I hope that Caroline would just kind of be like, get out of here now. I'm like, this is my trip now. Like you need to go. Um, but I definitely can also see James just kind of being like, no. Or like, I'm gonna go do this thing then while you figure yourself out, but I'll be here. And I'm like, ugh.
Or maybe somehow she'll find the apothecary and find like a little vial that has a poison in it and she can poison her very own James herself.
that'd be fantastic.
Or maybe the ghost of Ella and the ghost of Eliza is going to come back and help her and poison James for her.
Magic.
Yeah. She's going mudlarking again and she's
Magic.
going to find a completely sealed vial of something and she's just going to hope for the best.
Yeah.
Here, James,
She's
let's go
gonna
for
run the shop now. Back up.
Right.
She's going to continue on the apothecary murders.
Yeah.
Might as well at this point.
Be far more exciting than her life in Ohio.
True.
Exactly.
Instead of a handwritten ledger, it's going to be some vlog.
Yeah.
She's going to be posting TikToks.
Yeah. That's funny.
Gosh.
Well, is there anything else that we want to predict, that we want to add about Eliza, Nella, or Caroline? Or any other character that we haven't discussed much?
I hope we see more of Gaynor.
Yeah,
Me too.
I love Gaynor.
I think we're going to see a little bit more of her as well as we're gonna find out if Caroline's like actually pregnant or not. So
Are we going to find that out in the next section? Or are we going to find that out eventually?
I think since James is there, it's just kind of like get it over. I'd rather know now, right?
Maybe, yeah.
True. Well, that'll be interesting to see. Do we think she's pregnant? Or do we think it's stress and jet lag and etc.?
I'm gonna say I really hope she's not pregnant. Not with James's child.
So, but it will make for a better story, right? More conflicts and more decisions. And how does that help her grow or hold her back, right? So,
That's a good point.
Yeah, it would be a good story.
Maybe she
Especially-
has her own little Eliza and they can live in London and divorce James and leave James behind.
Not divorced, kill.
Well, that too.
Oh. All right. Well, then, for next week, we're still going to be reading this book, of course. So we're actually only going to end up reading 4 chapters. So it's going to be interesting what we cover. So we're going to read for next week, we're going to read chapter 19, but we're not going to read chapter 20. So it's going to be around 50-ish pages. That just helps us line us better up with the book, our ending, basically. So we've got about 3 weeks of this book left, and then we will be deciding what our new book is. And so next week, we'll all have a little book that we're going to nominate, and then we'll vote for a week, and then we'll have a new book, and we'll continue the book club. So that's all very exciting. And I can't wait to keep sharing this with you. So,
And just to make sure I have it right, reading chapter 19, not chapter 20.
yes, so we're reading for
Okay.
this next, yes, for the next section, we're reading chapter 19, but not chapter 20, around 50-ish pages.
Okay.
So I would like to thank everyone who's been here. So thank you, Book Club Mom, for showing up this week.
thank you.
Thank you, Decal, of course.
Thanks.
And thank you, Heart Illustrations, but you can call her Soap. And a huge thank you to our lovely tech person, Botsy. You can go find him at his Botsy Gaming. He streams every so often. So can't wait to see you all next week, and happy reading.